Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us today for the child sponsorship edition of Office Hours. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Zuri Group is a full-service consulting agency that works exclusively with nonprofits, from peer-to-peer fundraising, website design and development, digital advertising, and Google Grants account maintenance, to fundraising strategy, systems assessments and selections, full-scale CRM implementations, and everything in between. We are passionate about helping nonprofits use technology to build better relationships with their constituents and maximize their impact. My name is Lo, and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Zuri Group. If this is your first visit to our office hours, welcome, and let's talk about what you can expect over the next hour that we're together. Every month, our senior strategists and developers set aside some time to talk with colleagues about nonprofit technology and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. We really want for office hours to be a chance for you to get some free consulting and to provide a space where we can all have an interactive conversation about what's going on in the nonprofit tech space. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat for your questions, comments, or technology issues. And however you decide to participate today, we're delighted that you took the time to be with us. So today we're going to be talking about the specific technology challenges that child sponsorship organizations face and how they can best leverage their CRM to support their programs. We're going to cover cost-effective recurring giving, program challenges and strategy, integrations between CRM and sponsorship tools, data visualization, and data management. And before we get started today, we've got a question for you. We'd like to know what systems you're using on the digital side and what systems you're using to manage your sponsorship and constituent donor databases. You can go ahead and type those answers into the chat. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it with the whole group directly, you can just share with the organizers and we can relay that anonymously for you. While everyone is typing in your answers, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. We've got Ken Swift, President of CRM Services here at Zuri Group, Karen Collins, Vice President of Client Success here at Zuri Group, Brandon Ferris, Senior Director of CRM Services here at Zuri Group, and Becky Graninger, Chief Development and Marketing Officer at Feed the Children. Ken, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure, just to kind of continue the introduction to what we're going to discuss over the next 45, 50 minutes or so. I wanted to, we had this idea as we were planning the Zuri Group Summit. The Zuri Group Summit was an opportunity where we got about 40 of our clients together in New York City this past summer just to talk. It was very broad spectrum. We talked about higher ed fundraising. We talked about hospital fundraising. We had a couple of our some of our colleagues from child sponsorship there. So we had a separate breakout session where we talked about what was going on in the child sponsorship world. And then we wanted to, as a continuation of that discussion, because I think we talked for about an hour and a half and we probably could have talked for days. So we didn't give everyone enough opportunity to talk, and we looked at that as being an opportunity for the child sponsorship communities to get together. It is certainly a place that is near and dear to my heart. My family actively sponsors a couple children through Compassion International. So it has been something that we've done for, probably close to a decade at this point. And when I started my career at Blackbaud 13, 14 years ago, some of my favorite clients that I worked with were the child sponsorship organizations. They have such passion for the work that they do. They're so mission focused that I wanted to find a way that we could continue to support, but not necessarily take the lead, but take a more of a logistical role in helping the child sponsorship community get together. And so, as a continuation of what we kicked off at the summit and what we're continuing here today, we've set up a LinkedIn group as an opportunity for different organizations to collaborate online, talk about things, share job postings if that's relevant. Really just an opportunity for individuals to connect via social media. And we hopefully this will also be an opportunity that we can have future webinar discussions specifically focused around child sponsorship and some of the unique fundraising strategies, technical strategies, operational challenges, logistical challenges that are somewhat unique to the child sponsorship community. And then a continuation of that, if there's an opportunity for us to get organizations together in a single location and have face-to-face discussions over a period of days, that would be something we would love to help participate in. So we realize we are not the experts when it comes to child sponsorship, but we do feel we have a lot of value to add from the technology, data visualization, reporting standpoint. But we really want to take a more logistical role in just helping this community come together and share the great work and see if we can't help more kids around the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. And I went ahead and popped in the link to our LinkedIn group for those of you who may not already be members who want to join. So I think the first thing that we're going to go ahead and tackle today, we got a lot of great questions from you guys that submitted things when you were registering, so thank you for those. I think the first thing we're going to tackle today is the sponsorship data management. Karen, do you want to kick us off there?
Absolutely. Thank you, L'Oreal. I have worked in the nonprofit space for about 13 years now, and in that time, I have personally worked for about a half a dozen, maybe a little more, child sponsorship organizations. So I echo Ken's sentiments in stating that this type of work is really near and dear to my heart. And while we may not, like Ken said, be experts in the actual sponsorship side of it, that interest and that desire to help facilitate what you all do by providing technology expertise, the management expertise is near and dear to my heart as well. And based on my experience, I have seen three consistent data challenges throughout each organization when working with child sponsorship. And while not all of them are particularly unique to child sponsorship organizations, there is a unique component because of what I've seen on the data side for sponsorship data. So we'll talk about two of those now on the data management side, and then one in a later segment of today's scheduled programming on the online digital side. So the first one is thoughtful management of the variety of supporters engaged with your organization. This seems to be a struggle that's not necessarily unique to sponsorship organizations, but because of disparate systems that are not integrated and inconsistent data management policies, and then the unique requirement of managing a multitude of constituent types, with sponsorship being one of them, those are causing a struggle with how to thoughtfully communicate with your constituents and understanding the full picture of what their involvement is with your organization. And then the second one that I've seen is the management of program data, meaning the available children that are eligible to be sponsored alongside the sponsored data and the interactions with that sponsorship. How do you build a deeper, more meaningful relationship with you and your constituents, as well as facilitating that relationship with between that sponsorship interaction. And so what we want to do is really understand how to have that real-time understanding of the program support and how that difficulty in parsing those together could be solved. And then the last one, which we'll talk a little bit later, is in the digital game and managing data available to constituents regarding sponsorships and how to thoughtfully encourage engagement between your supporters while also respecting the privacy and security aspects of managing that type of data. With having child data is a very sensitive thing. And then also just making sure that you're in compliance with the safety regulations when it comes to managing that data. So those are the three that I have seen as consistent data challenges that sponsorship organizations experience. And so in the next few minutes, we will focus on the first two topics around data management. And then, like I said, let's save that third digital experience for the next conversation. But Becky, I just wanted to offer you some time to expand upon this list and talk about how you have tackled some of the data management challenges at FEED and as well as at other sponsorship organizations that I know you've been a part of throughout your career.
So thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. So I tell colleagues all the time, especially very experienced direct marketing colleagues, that child sponsorship, as experienced and as brilliant and as process oriented as you are, child sponsorship can still bring you to your knees because the data requirements and the relationship requirements are so different. So classic fundraising is we ask for money, we get money, and we say thank you for money. And then you rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. Child sponsorship has this ongoing back and forth series of communications that really makes life very complicated, and it accelerates the need for technology for you to manage the book of business. So you can get data from the child, everything from enrolling the child to correspondence from the child that has to be managed. You can also have site closures that cause things to happen. The organization wants to communicate with the sponsor, so that's generating one-way communication. And then you get information from the sponsor, and all of those things trigger a back and forth that normally is not how you've done it once and you stop, but it causes another reaction and another reaction and another reaction. And then building on what was already mentioned, we're normally working within multiple system environments and we have to connect them. I think the thing that though is the hardest for any child sponsorship program is how do you handle multis? So roughly, if you're doing well, at least 20% of your files should be multi-sponsors, that they have more than one child, 1, 2, 3, up to 10, sometimes even more. And that makes life, again, much more complicated. Here's one simple example. You have 3 children, 2 of them you're current on, and a third one you're delinquent. What statement do you send them? What message do you send them? So every touch has to be examined from a single to a multi, and how does all that fit together? And it is complicated. I'm just going to keep saying it's complicated.
It is, I agree.
Okay.
Well, and so with that, Becky, I know, in talking specifically about sponsorship data, you've mentioned about the integrations. And I know Zuri Group has been working with Feed the Children on figuring out the logical and thoughtful way to integrate systems. Can you talk a little bit, and then I want Ken, you to weigh in from a technical side, a little bit on the program side, what that means for you all, right? We can talk a lot on the Zuri Group side about the technical complications on integrating the systems, but what is so important on that program side that we need to be aware of in the IT or data world to make sure is integrated for you all to be able to have those thoughtful communications with your sponsors?
So I think the first technological thing is that we do have a custom application for the field for them to put enrolled child information. But it's more than just enrolling the child. They also then have to keep track of when did they send the physical materials to us, what's going on with the translation of the materials, what happens then if the child is no longer in the program. Again, if we have to change a site or transfer children, we had to develop this outside entity that then had to talk to our CRM. And the CRM, which we recently converted to BBCRM, is a great fundraising platform. And while there is a child sponsorship module, it's not robust enough. So it's not robust enough to handle personal correspondence back and forth. It could certainly import information and allow us to send other information back out. But the complexity of a workflow, for example, if a child leaves the system, we can set up an automated process that says, okay, child has left the system. We now need to transfer a new child into that sponsorship, and we have to update that sponsor with a new welcome kit. We can do that in an automated fashion for the most part. But let's say the child didn't really leave the program, the child actually passed away. That communication to the sponsor has now become a high level special treatment. How do we slow down the automation? How does information get coded correctly in order to then to kick off another set of interventions? Because we just don't want to, in a welcome kit, say, hi, something bad happened to your child, here's another kid. Right. Every single piece has to be just examined so carefully, but and then being able to set up the reserves of children is a complicated process. So again, Blackbaud has a functionality to manage the reserves of children that we're using for various marketing applications, but it's not always that straightforward that how you reserve a child for this special event. What happens again when the child is no longer in the program? You then have to take them out of the reserve. What happens if the sponsor cancels their sponsorship. Well, the reality is there's a small percentage of people who cancel are going to come back. They really would like to have their same child. So then you want to hold on to that child a little bit longer in case there's a chance that that sponsor does want that child back. It's just every piece has such an excruciating amount of detail that has to be considered. And so keeping track of data moving from this custom application into CRM, and then from CRM, if it's sponsor generated, back, what needs to go back to the field, which goes back to the child. That's what's been particularly difficult for us.
Right, so the bi-directional feed and making sure that the right information is there. And it also sounds like, really being focused on those different workflow scenarios to make sure that we don't accidentally send something that feels inappropriate in a given situation. And so making sure that all of those scenarios, even if they may be outliers, right? Because a lot of times what we focus on in technology is the 80-20 rule. And in sponsorship, that's not an option because 80% isn't enough. We need to make sure that those 20% pieces, because those are the ones that are usually the most sensitive, are taken care of in the workflow as well.
I think that's a good point. And I would also say that that 20% or 5% or 2% doesn't mean we have to programmatically solve it through technology, but we have to throw it to a place where we can manually intervene.
Right, and have that opportunity to manually intervene. I like that. And I appreciate that comment on there, because a lot of times I think people do get caught up on this idea that the technology has to solve every solution. But you're right, it's not necessarily that the technology has to solve it, but it does need to catch it and move it somewhere so that you can manually make those decisions. I really appreciate it a lot. Ken, I wanted to bring you in here to talk a little bit about the integration. But before we get to that, L'Oreal, did we have any interesting solutions come about from the first poll that you requested?
Yeah, let me dig in here quickly. We've got people who are using Oracle-based databases. We've got some folks who are using BBCRM and then linking to the global pool via API or JSON data through a internally built UI. And we've got people using BBCRM for sponsorship management and BBIS for customer-facing self-service, and then using things like ViewSpark and HubSpot on the marketing piece and communication. So lots of different things.
It is a lot of different things, and that's good, right? Because people are using what works for them. It also is an opportunity for us to really dive in on the LinkedIn group of what's working well or where people are getting stuck. And I know, Becky, you mentioned a couple of areas where BBCRM may not be as strong as what we would desire. And so it's really good for us to understand that there are a lot of tools out there, and I really hope that on our LinkedIn portal or group that we can facilitate conversation around what is working well and those struggles that we can potentially tackle and offer solutions. So speaking of that, Ken, one of the questions that we had during the registration was, how do you tackle integrations between your CRM and your sponsorship tools? So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk on the technical side there, Ken.
Sure. Let me talk about it on the program side. So the field offices getting data back into the kind of the system of record. So, and this is just, so much has changed in the last 15 years in technology. I remember when I first started working with, I believe it was Save the Children, probably around 2008 timeframe. One of the biggest challenges that we had was the disconnected nature of the data. Because of the reach of technology, the reach of telecommunications, especially in third world countries, just was not there. Now, those issues haven't completely been put to rest, but one could argue that the telecommunication networks in those countries is probably better than what we have here in the States. And so, as I've spoken with other child sponsorship organizations more recently, they are taking iPads and going into the field and gathering information. They are not collecting stuff in paper and taking it back to the next largest city and hand keying that stuff into a spreadsheet and then uploading that spreadsheet to a system and that turnaround of data might take days or weeks to get back into the system of record and make that child available for sponsorship, or get that letter back to the family. But rather, that's just something that I want to say it's happening in real time, but it's happening in days, not weeks. So that piece has come a long ways in the past 10 or 15 years. Just the data, the availability of getting data into the system in a more timely fashion. In terms of applications, the other trend that I'm seeing, and it's just not unique to child sponsorship, is organizations are going best of breed or creating utilities on their own. And so they might be choosing a system of record. So they might choose a Salesforce or a Blackbaud CRM or another Razor's Edge or another fundraising database that would be their kind of system of record. But then they are going to best of breed solutions for things like online child sponsorship, or they're using Magento and tying that back into Blackbaud CRM, or they're finding some way to spin that up on Luminate Online, or rolling their own solution from scratch, or heavily customizing one of Blackbaud's like a net community or a BBIS in order to gather that information. So there's no single answer there. There's so many different answers. Part of it is driven by cost, part of it is driven by need. But the technology, the ability to integrate different solutions is like the telecommunications is a whole lot better now than it was 10 years ago. So spinning up a Magento type solution that has very robust APIs and using a system like a Salesforce or a Blackbaud that also has robust APIs allows you to integrate those that data in a much more readily available fashion than maybe the CSV transfers of days gone by.
Thank you. And I agree with you in terms of the best of breed. And I think, Becky, you all have experienced that a little bit at Feed the Children with choosing to stay with Magento for the online sponsorship portal rather than moving over to BBIS based on the requirements and needs that you all had. You chose not to go with the integrated solution in-house at Blackbaud because that user experience was the top priority. Any thoughts there?
Well, I think that still speaks to an issue even within the Blackbaud family of products. Their core Luminate doesn't handle traditionally sponsorship, and BBIS does. And so the user experience with a Manage My Account was still an awkward one. And so we're still struggling with how do we get a seamless Manage My Account functionality for a sponsor where we would ideally want to keep track of child correspondence as well as give them opportunities for self-serve online, but would also love to make them make extra gifts. And we have to throw them to another place, and potentially they have two different logins. And so we're still very far away from a seamless execution online. I think the only savings grace is that most child sponsorships, that is their preferred way of giving. And so while they are making extra gifts, they tend to focus, an upgrade strategy is more around getting another sponsorship versus trying to get just another $25 donation. But we are still very far away from what we think is a really good experience for the sponsor online. And that's a challenge for us.
Sure. I want to open up, Brandon Ferris is with us today as well. So I just wanted to, Brandon, for you, what you have experienced. So Brandon is a design and functional leader at Zuri Group, and oftentimes sits alongside organizations to really tackle some of these user experiences, as well as making sure that the technology can support what that program needs to be able to get the data in and out. So Brandon, what are your thoughts here on how we properly balance the technology capabilities with the end user experience that we desire?
Hi, everybody. And
Brandon is also currently on site with a child sponsorship organization today. So
that is correct.
He is in the field, so to speak.
That is correct. And I do want to briefly just echo the sentiments that have been expressed earlier about, you know, how rewarding we find it working with child sponsorship organizations. There is a closeness to the mission that you can perceive among everyone who works within a child sponsorship organization. And in other nonprofit sectors, it's somewhat easy in one's day-to-day work to feel somewhat separated from mission, and that is not the case in the child sponsorship world. Everyone we work with is passionate about mission, and it's a really rewarding experience to work with organizations like this, because that mission focus leads to a razor sharp, incisive approach to decision making. You know, because there are simple questions to ask. Does this help us raise more money more efficiently? Does it not? And it's not feasible to continue to do things inefficiently when there are other ways to do them. And so now back to Karen's question. So in my role, I find myself working to help users and staff within child sponsorship organizations find better ways to do their work. And it's a space that's in between, you know, it's semi-technical. And I think one of the more, some of what I encounter frequently, child sponsorship organizations have in common with other types of nonprofits, and some things are unique. And I think one of the central challenge for child sponsorship organizations, and I think Becky articulated this beautifully, and I put it a slightly different way, is that it's a combination of, it's high volume on the one hand, but it requires the sort of personal touch that we normally would associate with sophisticated major giving operations. And so it's a marriage of the two. And so users that I work with are looking for easier and easier ways to see information so they can respond quickly and effectively to requests from sponsors. That's a common refrain I hear. And so a lot of the work that I would say that the challenge, the universal challenge that I run into in talking with clients is, how can we have all that, we have a lot of information. It isn't necessarily as complete as we'd like, but how do we best present this information to our staff, whatever their role is, depending on their role, so they can quickly see and access and take action on the information. So for example, when a sponsor calls and they're asking for information about their child or about the sponsorship or the effort they're supporting. And so a lot of the work that I find myself and colleagues working on is around finding more and better ways to give users access to that. So this is a little bit of a different technical challenge than integration. Once the data is there, how do we best make that accessible to users so they can do what they need to do with it? And I think that's still emerging, you know, and data visualization and it is an emerging discipline within the nonprofit world, and I think we're starting to see more and more of that, and I expect that's a trend that's going to continue, because the root idea being trying to empower users, staff, whatever their role, right, to get to the information they need so they can focus on using the information to accomplish mission and not focus on managing the information. And that's a universal challenge, and but it's extra critical here in the child sponsorship space. And so customizations, process changes, configurations, thoughtful data visualization tools, those are all arrows in that quiver of making it easier for staff to see what they need so they can focus on their mission. And that's a lot of what that would really best summarize kind of the core challenge that I work with.
And I agree. And one of the questions when folks registered today was specifically about data visualization, and we hope to have enough time to talk through that today. But if not, that's exactly what the LinkedIn group will facilitate is, how are you able to start to incorporate some of these things like data visualization, or what custom solutions have you built between the systems that you have in order to make some of these challenges more palatable or workarounds. One of the other, speaking of questions and comments that were added in during registration, one of the others was specifically talking about the types of notifications or workflows that you all as organizations are using in order to request and track child-related data updates from the field. And so, Ken, you mentioned a little bit about the evolution of that and coming and moving from maybe paper to pen type of thing to the iPad. But Becky, I just wanted to talk, is there anything interesting given, you know, your background at FEED as well as I know Child Fund and other organizations that you've worked for, that you see that's worked really well in managing that workflow of data and that move of data from the field into a database of record and then being able to use for thoughtful communication?
Wow, you put a qualifier on that, which is do it really well. I think the industry is still struggling with that. And I would build on, actually, I'm going to go back to what Brandon was saying. I do think there's an expectation amongst sponsors that's very different than used to be, which is they want more information and they want it faster. So it's like, why can't I Facebook with my sponsored child? Why do I have to wait? And the whole language barrier and translation and all those pieces. I think it's really hard to move the data back and forth. So you kind of have to just build, whether you use interactions in BBCRM, but you've got to build these proactive routines that say, if this happened and I don't hear back in whatever days, what's the red flag? And then how do I then pursue that through the system? And I still think that's hard, and I don't think we've solved, I don't know if anyone's really doing that well. I think we do it.
Well, one of the things that it seems like it keeps coming back in what you've been talking about, Becky, is those workflows and being able to document them so that we can predict them. It doesn't mean that we have to have a solution for all of them, but if we're at least aware of them, then we can put in system components to allow for those to be moved so that a more thoughtful process can be put in place, even if that's a manual process and not an automated process within the system.
Yeah, and lots of sponsorship agencies have built over time service level agreements of how long does it take for correspondence, and then when do you raise the red flag, so that you're not always, so that you can proactively get in front of, instead of the sponsor asking you, that you figured out that it's late, and then you go to the sponsor first, potentially, and say, hi, we're still checking. Wouldn't that be great customer service? We tend to chase the other way, which is field, why haven't you done this?
Right. So it looks like we've got input on this. Ken, it looks like it's a little more technical. Do you want to look in the chat and read that and see if there's any information that we want to share to the group regarding input around the JSON data?
Do a song and dance for a second. Let me read it and contemplate.
I know L'Oreal, you're probably tapping your fingers at us because we do want to move over to the digital side and give time to fundraising. So I want to give Ken a chance to read that, but I'll start to frame up some of the digital side so that we can talk through that after Ken is able to digest that information. So I mentioned earlier that the third trend that I see is that digital game and managing data that's available to constituents regarding the sponsorships. And Becky, you mentioned a little bit, you know, why can't I talk with my sponsored child on social media, you know, and how we deal with the digital game in this area, because, you know, you all want to be able to get those sponsorship relationships as much as they can to be able to interact together, while also making sure that you are following the compliance rules that you have on keeping data secure or keeping you know, the children safe when it comes to providing access to people that, while have been vetted because they're willing to sponsor them, but that's about as much information as we have on our sponsors. So I'm interested in moving over to that digital side so that we can talk through some of those challenges. But Ken, any thoughts based on the attendee input?
It's just that I guess my takeaway is everybody has found a way to aggregate this data. in some cases, it's in some organizations it requires a little more duct tape and baling twine than others. But there is no cohesive standard-based solution, because there's not an off-the-shelf field management solution to gather all this field level data. And so every one of these organizations has rolled their own. Now there are some off-the-shelf CRM solutions that handle child sponsorship better than others, and so that helps out on the CRM on the sponsor side. But when you on the child side, it is almost always a unique homegrown solution that in some cases these are 20-plus-year-old systems that have just been bolted onto as technology has advanced, and organizations are trying to figure out what do we do next. Is it time for a rewrite now with better technology in place?
I have so many questions. I could go on and on with this, but I promised L'Oreal that I would move on to the next phase and give other folks a chance to talk and talk a little bit about other things. But it sounds like there's some thoughtful conversation that we can move over to that LinkedIn group around managing how data gets aggregated into a single solution or into a single location, so that we can then make sure that the proper information gets moved around and distributed or visualized to the right folks, whether that's to executives really wanting to understand how sponsorship programs are working internally, to making sure that the marketing team has data available to have thoughtful communications with prospects, to managing the right relationships between the children and those folks that are desiring to sponsor children. So lots of opportunity for us to continue those conversations. So L'Oreal, I'm going to hand it back over to you to make sure that I'm managing all of this properly, or if there's anything in particular that we want to transition to when we go over to digital conversation.
No, you're doing great, Karen. Thank you. I do have a live poll for folks that's going to pop up onto your screen shortly. And we just want to know, which marketing channels have you seen to be most effective for digital sponsorship acquisition? There's going to be some things to choose from. If you don't see your most effective channel listed, please feel free to pop that into chat. This was a question that came in from an attendee that registered, so we're glad to be able to share this with you. And let's keep talking about digital and the user experience for sponsors.
Perfect. I'll give everyone a chance to answer that question. This is where we need some Jeopardy music.
Okay, we're starting to see things come through. I'm actually surprised that there is digital advertising is not one of the things, but definitely people are leaning more towards social, and then the rest is kind of split between content marketing, video, and email. Very interesting.
That is. Well, Becky, do you want to talk a little bit about what you all see, or what you've seen as the channels that have been most effective for you all in the most recent years?
So I might not be super helpful on this one. So what's effective for us is offline. So digital becomes a supporting player from an acquisition perspective. Frankly, there's a couple of big boys who are dominating the market, especially in the digital pay per click, and we can't compete against that. So we're getting a small trickle, but it is a supporting role, although we also believe that our offline are going to continue to be supported by digital applications.
Right. And when you talk, Becky, a little about offline, you all are doing some quite a variety of things, and it's not just your direct mail. I mean, you guys are also doing some foot traffic prospecting or digital games.
Right. So the primary methods for sponsorship, again, against a handful of the largest agencies, are certainly face-to-face, and then the artist channels, the Christian artist channels. And so those are the two methodologies that we're using as well.
That's really good to hear. And I think it'll be interesting to talk through some of those and continue the conversation around the offline components, as those are effective tools, and there's always room for improvement. Even if something's tried and true, that doesn't mean that we should just let it run its course. We should make sure that we're always keeping a pulse point on there. When it comes to to the digital side, Brandon, you know, with the plethora of organizations that you have worked with, and seeing kind of the poll there that social is jumping up the game, you know, what are some recommendations that you have seen come about in your work regarding either social or email, or that online experience that you think the group would enjoy hearing?
Sure. It's a great question, and somewhat surprising and not entirely surprising to see the variety of poll responses, because the nonprofit sector at large generally tends to take a bit longer than the for-profit sector to fully engage with emerging technologies. And so it's been my experience so far through not just in child sponsorship organizations, but across nonprofit verticals that we work with, that a proactive, planful, thoughtful, intentional approach to using social media for whatever the marketing purpose might be, whether it's acquisition as it is for child sponsorship organizations, or it's more to do with engagement as it might be with colleges and alumni, that is itself a fairly new and emerging discipline within the nonprofit industry. And more often than not, what we're seeing is best efforts, but not yet adequately resourced, you know, in terms of staff and time. But it is changing and it's emerging. There's a growing recognition that it's a critical channel for reaching out. But I think in my experience so far, we're really at sort of we're still sort of at the beginning in terms of figuring out any sort of formal disciplines around how best to do this. You know, how do you do it strategically, and how do you get beyond merely having a Facebook presence and posting? How do you actually integrate this in with your other marketing strategies? Child sponsorship organizations are actually more on the forefront of this because of the need to constantly acquire potential donors. So they tend, and going along with something I said earlier, because of the need to fundraise efficiently, I mean, they have to be agile, they have to be nimble in terms of considering, vetting, and either adopting or not adopting new technologies and new approaches. But at this point in time, I think there's still some distance to go. It's still fairly new, and it's a little bit scattershot at this point.
Right, and I agree. I think one of the things that we have to focus on the digital side, and it's been evolving since the dawn of kind of this social emergence, is that, you know, when Facebook first started and when Twitter first started, you know, there was a difficulty in being able to analyze the impact that these types of communications were having on nonprofit organizations. And, you know, were people seeing a post on Facebook and going and actually making a donation? And it was tricky to be able to track that. That issue has been solved, right? And you are now able to see the analytics from your digital tools, and not just having to make assumptions on how somebody navigated to your sponsorship portal or your donation portal. The key there, though, is to take those insights and actually use them and look at them. And that's one of the struggles where I think organizations are saying, okay, now we have this data, you know, but it's not in a single location for us to review it, or we don't know what we're looking for, or why we're looking at this information, or why it's important. And Zuri Group actually recently hired a digital strategist, and her focus has been on helping organizations be able to use that information to then make decisions on how to better communicate, right? How to build in some automated workflows, not just a welcome series, right? People, I feel like, you know, you get your email tools set up and you create a welcome series, you hit go, and it just goes. And then there's no analytics, there's no thoughtful analysis of the analytics that come as a result of that, or any brainstorming around how we can use some of that service center opportunities in digital systems to interact better. And I think another thing that folks know they should be doing, but maybe not practicing as well as they could, and L'Oreal, you might actually be able to add some commentary here, is really putting out a digital calendar. and really understanding what it means to be thoughtful in how you're communicating and the various channels and the number of touch points that you're having with your potentials, your actual sponsors or donors, and making sure that the crossover that you're providing is thoughtful and not feeling repetitive. And so I think those are definitely some ideas that can be further pursued through the LinkedIn group of what people have found that works well, what opportunities for automation of those digital pursuits, and then what has not been effective, and potentially uncovering alternatives in order to turn that channel into a profitable line. I'll pause here to see if any of the other panelists have any ideas to throw out on the digital side.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of great ideas. I will just say that child sponsorship in particular really lends itself to the storytelling that is so necessary, and like the scroll stopping when you're on social media. So I would definitely, they say children and small animals are the things that will get people to stop. So I think anytime that you can find ways to incorporate a really evocative story in an image and via text, you really have an opportunity to captivate people's attention and to get them to interact and engage. So.
And Karen, I would add a little bit to that too. And as Karen mentioned, I happen to be on site working this week with a large child sponsorship organization, and I've seen this at others. They invest a significant amount of time and resources into producing some of the most amazing video content that I've ever seen from a nonprofit, and it's extremely powerful, and they're working diligently to integrate that more and more into their communications, and it's been tremendously effective. I mean, the impact of it is immediate, even as a vendor working with them. When you see a preview of something that's about to be rolled out to their constituency, it's incredible.
I agree. Thank you for that, Brandon. Well, one of the questions that came about to us as we were from a participant in the registration portal was what's the most important aspect of the online experience for a current sponsor? And that's a difficult question to answer. But I do think that one of the things that is very vital to maintaining these relationships is to make it easy. Make it easy for those that desire to be a part of your organization to become and to participate, whether that's to sponsor, whether that's to donate, or to manage their current sponsorships and donations. I do believe that there's an opportunity to people are so used to the Amazon experience, or the, that checkout when you're now able to order your groceries and have them delivered to your door in 2 hours. That's the expectation on the digital side that we are up against in competing. And so that interaction, if somebody has sponsored a child, making sure that if they want to check in on that sponsorship, or if they want to add a sponsorship, that it's not an arduous process that requires a phone call. That they are able to do that on the digital side, and be able to feel good about the decisions that, or the interactions that they are able to have with you all. So anybody else have any thoughts on that question? And I'll give just a few minutes, and then I know, L'Oreal, you'll want us to move on to the next section.
So I would say certainly the service center and engaging in correspondence. So it'd be really great for you to see all the letters that you've written, the letters your child has written back, if you happen to be a corresponding sponsor, which not all of them are. Wouldn't it be great to see not just the picture of your current year child, but the history of all the pictures, so that you've seen how that child has grown and progressed. Back to expectations, the power of one, which is the power of child sponsorship. There is amazing content, but sponsors really want to know about their child and their community. So how do you load up? Can you get video of your child? So there's a lot of organizations trying to test that. Technology is lagging behind that, and it's not all technology. So there are lots of opportunities to deepen the relationship by providing content, but there's also a huge cost in collecting that content. So
And there's safety and security information, right? Because it would be wonderful to have a video of your child, but you have to be cognizant of what's in the background of that video. And that's not always something that people think about when they're asking and requesting this information, right? And so it's a lot easier in still photography to make sure that that piece of it is covered, but in video, it's even harder. So I agree, it's one of those things where it's a desire, but the technology is not quite there yet to make sure that you're checking all the boxes. Great. L'Oreal, do you want to, is there anything from the chat or anything that we need to handle on the digital side before we go into the fundraising piece?
I think we're ready to pop into fundraising, and given the limited amount of time that we have left, there's so much to go through, and this is definitely just the first of many child sponsorship focus office hours to come. So if we didn't get to your question or your topic today, please don't worry, we will definitely be doing more of these in the future. But maybe we can start off just talking about cost-effective recurring giving with regards to fundraising. I know there were a number of questions about that came in before from registrants, and there have also been some that have come in while we've been on the call today.
Great. And Becky, do you have any tips on what those strategies are to make sponsorship fundraising more efficient, making sure that more money goes to the field? That was one of the questions that was submitted.
So the answer is not going to be a surprise to anybody. It's really all about retention of the sponsorship. That's how you're going to make generate more money, cover the cost of your acquisition faster so that you can push more money to the field. So easier said than done, and nothing new here, but it's all about retention.
Absolutely.
Wish I had a magic answer.
Brandon, any magic wands on your side on how to make things more efficient on maybe on the technology side in order to offer some relief there?
Sure. Well, in a way, this is a corollary of the question of retention. And one of the very common challenges we encounter with child sponsorship organizations who do trade in a very high volume of recurring gifts, and therefore credit cards means a lot of credit card expirations, and that's managing that. So there's a lot of money loss simply because a recurring gift donor's credit card has expired. And so there are tools out there. Different credit card merchants, for example, are increasingly offering services that enable automatic credit card update. So if you're not using a merchant provider that does that, it's worth exploring whether that's something that your provider will be providing soon, or whether another provider that's compatible with your organization and your systems might be something to investigate. Because simply getting the money from it, so it's retaining, it's sort of a subset of retention. You have donors who have not canceled, but yet you're not getting money from them. So that's not an easy thing to solve, but there are increasingly some tools for that, and I think it's a great avenue to look at.
Hey, Brandon, I want to jump on that one really quickly as well. So one thing that I've seen a couple organizations do is, because so many child sponsors, myself included, have multiples, the ability to group those transactions together into a single charge in order to save on the transaction fees, and that can save you. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it can certainly add up, especially for. I mean, it's not unusual for a sponsor to have 10 or more children under sponsorship, and if each one of those is a $35 fee, $35 charge with a separate transaction fee, and that happens every month. We're talking big numbers at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great solution there, or thought, Ken, and how to offer that. And I think you do have that multi option in some checkout systems, and exploring that opportunity, or exploring conversations with your credit card processor on what opportunities you have there to bulk options and open that door of conversation.
Because I've also seen one organization that their secondary charges were being flagged as fraudulent because they were for the same dollar amount on the same day, and so that's something else to be aware of and watch out for.
Right, because if you decided to sponsor 3 children on the same day and you give them the same credit card because that's the one that's in your wallet or in your hand at the time, yeah, the system is doing its job to flag that as a potential issue when in reality it's not, and it's more common for sponsorship organizations to have that come in. No, I agree. So there's another question in the attendee question here. Is there a similar product or system for recurring gifts that could get us part of the way to sponsorship? So I think I have to read between the lines here a little bit, but is there something that you all are using that allows a recurring donor that may not actually be a sponsor to trigger that or to facilitate moving them, elevating them into a sponsor? Becky, is there something that you all have found effective?
I'd go the other way. I'd stay with recurring. So here's the thing about child sponsorship. It is the granddaddy of all recurring gift products. It comes with a high field cost. So if you can get a donor to give you a recurring gift to either your unrestricted fund or a broadly restricted fund, with the only operational costs being your marketing stewardship cost and not program costs, organizationally, you'd be way ahead. So we actually have, recurring gift is a primary strategy for us to increase the value of our donors. And we're pursuing both child sponsorship and just recurring giving. And one of it's a named program and the other is get a recurring gift any way that you can. So child sponsorship comes with a heavy cost infrastructure, and you have to be comfortable with that.
And that is an interesting point on, you at the surface, you desire to have sponsors, right? Because you want to be able to sponsor the children and be able to make those connections. But that cost of a sponsorship is higher than the cost of just a recurring donor, and the restricted gift versus an unrestricted gift that comes along as a tag to those donor types are something to consider. So if you do have folks that, like Becky said, are willing to support you all and are behind the mission without necessarily restricting that gift to a particular entity, then yeah, I think you have hit the jackpot, and you may want to look at how to fuel that and how to increase those types of sponsors or donors, I mean. Well, that's great. Well, I know we are up on time. So L'Oreal, I am going to hand everything back over to you. We did not get to the data visualization conversation. We will certainly start to post in the LinkedIn group about some ideas there and some conversations to post or to facilitate engagement. And so I encourage all of you to go over, and I think L'Oreal did put the link in, and we'll make sure that that's also in our thank you email. But L'Oreal, I will hand it over to you after that plug for the LinkedIn group.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I can't believe the hour has already flown by, but it definitely did. So thank you, Ken, Karen, Brandon, and Becky. I really appreciate you hosting this discussion today. And thank you to all of you who joined us in real time, and for those that registered so that they could get the link to the recording and ask questions. We had a bunch of questions we didn't get to, so we will definitely be doing another child sponsorship focused session of office hours. If you've got a question you'd like to see answered, a topic or an issue you'd like to see us cover in an upcoming session, or if you're interested in joining us as a panelist, you can go ahead and send me an email at officehours@zurigroup.com, and we will see you next month. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.